Israel has attacked Iran's capital, Tehran, overnight. The strikes targeted the country's nuclear program and killed at least 2 top military officers. It appears to be the most significant attack Iran has faced since the 1980s and its war with Iraq. Iran has already begun its retaliation, launching more than 100 drones towards Israel. US President Donald Trump said he had warned Iran about this, and with even more brutal attacks planned, is now urging them to make a deal. In a moment, we'll speak to experts about Iran's nuclear program and the wider regional implications of this attack. But first, with all the latest, here's Mahatir Pasha.
Residents of Tehran awoken to the destruction of Israeli airstrikes. In the early hours of the morning, CCTV captured the moment the attacks hit, lighting up the Iranian capital's skyline and leaving this building consumed by a raging blaze. When daylight came, the scale of the damage became clearer, with residential buildings and cars destroyed, leaving locals in a state of confusion.
This building where we live blew up. I don't know if they hit it with a missile or what. I don't know what happened to neighbouring apartments.
Whilst Iranian state television showed wreckage caused to residential areas, Israel insisted its strikes were targeted, aimed at the heart of Iran's nuclear program.
Today, Israel has shown that we have learned the lessons of history. When enemies vow to destroy you, believe them. When enemies build weapons of mass death, stop them. As the Bible teaches us, when someone comes to kill you, rise and act first. This is exactly what Israel has done today. We have risen like lions to defend ourselves.
The strikes, which were aimed at dozens of targets around the country, have reportedly left top Iranian military officials and scientists dead, including the leader of the country's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard, General Hossein Salami. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has warned Israel should expect severe punishment as his country contends with what appears to be the most significant attack it's faced since being at war with Iraq in the 1980s. And Israel seems to be readying itself as air raid sirens blared through Jerusalem and the defense minister declared a state of emergency. Iran has already launched 100 drones in response, according to the Israeli military. Israel's closest ally has distanced itself from these strikes, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying the country took unilateral action, while world leaders have urged for restraint and de-escalation.
And everybody is focused on de-escalation, but of course all the next steps will follow from that. So it's difficult now to predict exactly what will happen over the next 24 and 48 hours, but I think there is a focused endeavor to make sure that de-escalation is the key.
But whether or not the calls for de-escalation will be enough to prevent an all-out war between these two bitter Middle East adversaries remains to be seen. Mahatir Pasha, ITV News.
Well, to talk more about this, I'm now joined by Daria Dolzikova, a researcher who specialises in nuclear weapons technology. Daria, what does Iran's nuclear program exist of exactly? What are we talking about?
So it's quite an advanced and a very dispersed program. So Iran has a number of enrichment facilities, which are facilities where they're enriching uranium to fairly high levels, not quite to the levels that would be needed to produce a nuclear weapon, but not too far off. Besides the enrichment facilities, there's a number of other sites, uranium conversion facilities, fuel fabrication sites, uranium storage facilities. The list goes on. But it's quite an advanced program, and that's what's raised concerns really over years now, but particularly over the last few months and over the last couple of days, the extent of the Iranian nuclear program, but also concerns over its visibility to the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the international watchdog for nuclear programs.
Okay, so that's the fear, that we don't know exactly what's going on and how much they're producing, I suppose. I mean, how dangerous could it be?
Well, so we actually do have a fairly good picture of what the program looks like. The concerns over access by the International Atomic Energy Agency were largely over past activity, but we have a pretty decent picture of what the Iranian nuclear program looks like now. Now, having said that, not to sound trite, but we of course don't know what we don't know, and there is the possibility that there might be some secret, smaller sites where Iran might be engaging in activity that might be relevant to weaponization as well.
So you say they haven't quite, well, as far as we know, converted them into nuclear weapons. So how dangerous is it?
So yes, they haven't made the decision. The latest assessment from the U.S. Intelligence community is that Iran has not made the decision to move towards a nuclear weapons capability. However, they are fairly close if they did decide to move towards a nuclear weapons capability. So as I mentioned, they're enriching uranium to fairly high levels, not quite weapons grade, but fairly close. They're amassing significant stocks of that enriched uranium. So the assessment is that if Iran decided to move towards a nuclear weapon, it has sufficient material that it could enrich to weapons grade, sufficient for a number of nuclear weapons in under a week. Now, that in itself is not sufficient to produce a nuclear weapon. You also need to manufacture the warhead. The warhead then needs to be mounted onto delivery systems, probably missiles, and that could take a bit more time. A little bit less clarity on how long that would take precisely, because those types of activities are not monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency, so we have less visibility at least in the public domain. But assessments range from anywhere from several months to perhaps even over a year.
Okay, but Iran does have warheads that they could mount them onto.
Well, so Iran has missiles, but you would need to manufacture the actual nuclear warhead. So the enriched uranium would have to be encased inside of a nuclear warhead. It's engaged in a number of activities that would be helpful to move towards weaponization, but the actual production of a nuclear warhead, as far as we know, they've not actually done that.
To a certain extent, the Obama government had kept this at bay. Is that right? And then when Trump came in, things were changed, perhaps his first term. Is that right?
To an extent. So the Obama administration had concluded an agreement with the Iranians, and there were a few other actors in that agreement, including the UK and France and Germany and Russia and China, to basically limit the Iranian nuclear program. So it wouldn't have eliminated the program entirely, but it would have kept it at a certain level that wasn't nearly as threatening as where the program is now. The United States, under the first Trump administration, pulled out of that agreement. Iran had stayed compliant largely with that agreement for a little while, and then eventually started to pull back compliance with that agreement as well, and has now violated the terms of that agreement. And the program, as a result, has advanced quite significantly, yes.
Okay, so let's talk about these attacks by Israel. Do we know how much damage has been done to Iran's nuclear program and how quickly they could perhaps rebuild from here?
I mean, that's the big question now. It's still very early. I wouldn't even say days, very early hours. So we're just trying to piece together what the extent of the damage actually is. The International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed that the Natanz nuclear facility has been hit. So that site hosts Iran's largest enrichment facility. But Iran has a number of other sites which the agency has confirmed thus far have not been attacked, which doesn't mean they might not be attacked in future ways if those come. The extent of the damage to the nuclear program, again, quite hard to assess at the moment because we don't have all the details of what's actually been targeted. And we also don't know if Iran was planning to engage in weaponization and weaponize its capabilities. It might have been doing that at other facilities. That might not be public, but it might still be keeping secret. And then the big question is, as you said, has sufficient damage actually been done to make sure that Iran does not move towards a nuclear weapon, if that was the intent of the attack? Iran has the capability, it has the knowledge, and like I said, it has multiple facilities, many of which have not been attacked. So one could envisage Iran eventually reconstituting its capabilities and still deciding to move ahead towards weaponization.
This was a bit of a gamble by Israel, wasn't it? This could either, help eliminate the nuclear threat from Iran, or it could put a fire under them to make it happen quicker. I mean, what's your assessment?
Precisely. And that was the main argument of critics in advance of a decision to attack militarily, that actually such a military attack, first of all, historically, military attacks on nuclear facilities have not largely been effective for counterproliferation purposes. And particularly in the case of Iran, as I've already mentioned, because of the advanced state of the program and the dispersal of the program, it would be even more difficult to militarily address the threat of a potentially nuclear weapons armed Iran. And actually, what you might end up having is an Iran that decides that the only way to actually deter further attacks on its territory is to move towards that ultimate deterrent, a nuclear weapon. So that's a real threat that has been considered and that was warned about in advance of these attacks. In the short term, Iran has previously threatened to pull out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the treaty that underlines the international non-proliferation regime. So I would gamble to say that there is a decent risk of Iran moving towards an announcement to withdraw from the NPT. They've not said that yet, but I could see that as being a potential outcome of this as well.
Well, I was going to ask you what this meant for those US-Iran nuclear talks that were due to continue this weekend.
Yeah, very good question. So there were meant to be talks this weekend. Anyone's guess, but I would venture to say that the Iranians are probably not particularly interested in engaging diplomatically at the moment. But again, hard to say. We'll see, I guess, but I'm not optimistic.
Well, it's a moving situation. Thank you very much, Daya Dolzikova.
Thanks so much.
Now let's go to Dr. Borjo Ozicelik, a researcher who specialises in Middle East and international security. So this is a bit of a gamble by Israel, isn't it? Why have they attacked Iran now?
I think this is the culmination of many months, if not years, of preparation. So whilst the scale and the targeting of the attacks overnight that we saw in Iran may come as a surprise, I don't necessarily think that the attack itself is a surprise. I think this has been part of the Israeli security and defense establishment's planning for quite some time. Israel has identified the Iranian nuclear program and the potential of Iran becoming a nuclear threshold state as an existential threat to Israel for some time. What is surprising, however, is that these attacks overnight and potentially going into the next few days and weeks, as Israeli officials have stated, this has happened, disrupted the ongoing nuclear talks between US and Iran, the next one, which was the sixth round of talks, which would have happened this weekend in Oman.
So you've hinted at it there, but we think this might just be the beginning of Israel's attacks on Iran.
I believe so. And there have been statements from the Israeli side that hint that this might be the case, beyond hinting, actually, that this is not only a one-night operation, but part of a wider campaign to degrade, to downgrade Iran's nuclear capability and to remove the existential threat that Israel faces from Iran's nuclear program.
You also talked about there, it's happened during these ongoing talks between the US and Iran. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu's done it now because he sees a president in President Trump that might perhaps let him do this compared to previous governments? I mean, President Trump has said that they had nothing to do with it. The US had nothing to do with it. But what do you think?
Well, one of the biggest questions when we look at the history of Israeli military action in the Middle East and US support for it has been the question of whether the Americans provided a green light or an amber light. And the Israeli perspective has often been, we will seek forgiveness, not permission. And so it's unclear at the moment the extent to which the Trump administration authorized these strikes, although in my view, in my assessment, it is highly unlikely that there was no or little coordination between the two sides. This would have been a huge gamble from the Israeli point of view if they had done it completely alone without US coordination of some type. I think the most recent statements from President Trump indicate that his mind set right now is that the nuclear talks should continue. So clearly, in his mind, the potential for creating extra leverage still exists over Iran in these talks. But it remains to be clear to what extent that is even possible, given the extent of the damage and the humiliation that the Iranian regime now faces.
I was going to say, how likely is it that Iran will want to turn up to further nuclear talks this weekend?
There have been some statements coming out of Tehran that they see the attacks last night and the possibility of nuclear talks as two separate issues. So on the one hand, there's the attack on Iranian sovereignty, and Iran is expected to retaliate in defense of its borders, of its national security. But there appears to be sort of some nuance there, some fine-tuning in terms of will Tehran continue with nuclear talks? Not imminently, I don't think, given what they have just experienced, but whether they will go back to the negotiating table, I think it's just too soon to tell what the future of these talks might look like.
We know that Iran have sent drones towards Israel. Are they likely to retaliate more, do you believe?
I do, unfortunately. I think the region is now perched on the brink of the unknown in an unprecedented way. Iran has no good options at the moment. They have been forced, their hand has been forced to retaliate given the scale and the targeting of last night's attacks. But what that might look like, of course, is unclear. There are a menu of options. There's Iran's quite advanced ballistic missile program. It's already launched armed drones across into Israel, as you've said, which have been successfully intercepted. There are future longer-term attack possibilities or counterattack possibilities in the cyber sphere, which we may see targeting Israeli or American, European critical national infrastructure, for example. It's just too soon to tell, but I think what is clear is that Iran has no choice but to retaliate in some form. This could be a multi-phased, protracted type of counterattack, and we might not see something extreme or spectacular in the next 24 hours, but a response could be coming. What we don't know yet is the extent to which Israel effectively downgraded Iran's air defense systems. And we saw from last night's the failure of Iran to intercept, to counterattack. We've seen that already Iran was incredibly vulnerable.
So Iran's defences are already diminished. I mean, how likely do you think then, you've sort of talked about it there, that an all-out war is? I mean, we could be involved, as you say, for the cyber attack, rather than a physical war, perhaps.
At this point, despite the high level of threat, I think there still is a desire on the Iranian side to avoid an all-out confrontation. So it's the balance now between calibrating what an acceptable response might look like, bearing in mind the regime is under domestic pressure, and there are those in Iran who will expect a harsh response to Israel. But there's also the risk of what that might entail. Over the past few years, Iran has been normalizing ties with its neighbors in the Gulf, the GCC states. And so an imminent attack on energy installations or infrastructure in the Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz, I think, is unlikely. This would very much depend on the pace of developments in the coming days and weeks. But there is, both from a capability point of view and a political point of view, I don't think the desire is there in Tehran to launch an all-out war that could escalate regionally.
So when we hear from our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, calling for diplomacy, that is still a viable route, you think?
That is certainly the desirable route. And without a political settlement to this issue and the standoff between Iran and Israel and the wider regional tensions, I don't think a sustainable pathway to peace is possible. There needs to be a diplomatic solution and a political settlement to Iran's nuclear ambitions. The military strikes last night have diminished Iran's capabilities. It's yet to be seen what Israel will do next. It appears that the strategy on the Israeli side is to continue with these types of strikes. But the hope is that the path to diplomacy has not been closed completely. But again, in this moment of great uncertainty, an unprecedented level of risk, it's very, very difficult to see what that might look like in reality.
Dr. Ozechelik, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for now. For further updates throughout the day, keep an eye on the ITV News YouTube channel, the news section of ITVX, or our website, itv.com/news.